Millionaire hires a homeless woman to be his fake fiancée, but falls in love with her in front of everyone. Before we start this story, let me know, would you ever fall in love with someone who had absolutely nothing? No home, no money, just a heart full of silent hope? Because what you're about to hear is not just a love story. It's a story that defies everything we think we know about status, pride, and what truly matters. Enjoy the story. Julian Thorne existed in a world of polished glass and calculated silence. So, from his penthouse office, which loomed over the city like a modern-day fortress, he commanded an empire built on ruthless efficiency and a complete absence of sentiment. His life was a series of transactions, each one weighed, measured, and executed with the precision of a surgeon. But today the silence in his office was oppressive. It was punctuated by the one voice he couldn't hang up on, the one negotiation he couldn't win. A fiancé, Julian. It's not a request, it's a condition of the board. The voice of his grandfather, Arthur Thorne, crackled through the holographic display on his desk. The old man was a titan from a bygone era, a man who believed in lineage and legacy above all else. This company needs stability. It needs the image of a man who is settled. The investors are getting nervous. They see a lone wolf, not a king, with a dynasty. I've given this company double-digit growth for 5 consecutive years, Julian countered, his voice a low, controlled hum of frustration. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead. So, it has every bearing, Arthur's voice boomed. It speaks of your character, your future. Find a suitable woman. A Thorne woman. You have 6 months, or we officially begin the search for your replacement. The connection ended, leaving Julian in a silence that was now filled with a cold fury. He stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his hands clenched into fists. A suitable woman of wealth, of pedigree, of strategic alliances. He had tried that. Twice. Both times had ended in a disastrous wreckage of prenuptial agreements and emotional warfare. Love, to him, was a liability, a variable he couldn't control. But his grandfather had left him no choice. He needed a fiancée, a pawn in a game he was being forced to play. Miles below, on a wind-swept street corner, Ilara Vance was trying to capture the soul of the city. In a worn-out sketchbook with a piece of charcoal she'd found. She wasn't begging, she wasn't asking for anything, she was just existing. Her clothes were frayed, her face smudged with the grime of the streets, but her eyes, a startling shade of defiant blue, held a focus that was absolute. Homelessness had stripped her of everything but her dignity and her art. Each line she drew was an act of rebellion against the world that had forgotten her. She drew the hurried, faceless people, the steam rising from the grates, the lone pigeon pecking at a forgotten crust of bread. Peggy, she wasn't just observing, she was bearing witness. Julian stormed out of his building, his mind a tempest of strategy and resentment. He needed a solution, and he needed it now. As his driver pulled the sleek black car to the curb, his eyes fell on Ilara. He didn't see a person. He saw an answer, a blank slate. Someone with no connections, no family to complicate things, no power to challenge him. He saw a variable he could control completely. He dismissed his driver with a sharp wave of his hand, and crossed the street, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the pavement. Stowen, he stopped in front of her, casting a long shadow over her sketchbook. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "Side toll." Ilara looked up slowly, her gaze traveling from his polished shoes to his impassive, handsome face. She didn't look intimidated. She looked amused. A small, cynical smile touched her lips. "Let me guess. You want to save my soul in exchange for a handsome tax deduction?" Her sarcasm caught him off guard. He had expected desperation, not defiance. It was irritating. "Don't be absurd. I don't have time for games." He reached into his wallet, a place she hadn't seen real currency from in months. His place, but he didn't pull out cash. He pulled out a business card. "I need a fiancée, a temporary one. You will play the part, attend a few events, meet my family. In exchange, I will give you enough money to get off this street and start a new life." A real one. Ilara stared at him, the cynical smile fading, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. "You want to..." "T sos de 6e word pour shijen one sasiji." "Hire me to be your fiancée?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "What's the matter? Did all the gold diggers in your social circle suddenly develop a conscience?" Her words were like sharp little needles, pricking at his composure. "My reasons are my own," he said coldly. "This is a business transaction. You need a way out. I need a temporary solution. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." He saw the flicker of conflict in her eyes. He knew her pride was at war with her desperation. He pressed his advantage. "Think about it. A warm bed, 3 meals a day, a future. Or this." He gestured vaguely at the cold, unforgiving sidewalk. Hens. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest, her only real possession. The thought of a safe place, a place where she could draw without fear, a place where she could wash the city off her skin. It was a powerful lure. The price was her pride, her autonomy. But what were those worth when you were starving? "There would be a contract," she said, her voice barely a whisper, testing him. Julian's lips curved into a faint, triumphant smile. He knew he had won. "Of course," he replied. "I don't do business any other way." The contract was as cold and impersonal as Julian himself. Laid out on the mahogany table of a law office that smelled of old money and power. It detailed every aspect of their 6-month arrangement. Ilara read each clause, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She was to be provided with housing, a wardrobe, and a generous weekly stipend. She was to attend all functions as Julian's loving fiancée. She was to adhere to a pre-approved backstory. And at the end of the 6 months, upon successful completion of her duties, a sum of money that made her head spin would be transferred to an account in her name. The final clause was the sharpest. She was to disappear from his life completely, with no further contact. "It's a comprehensive agreement," the lawyer said, his tone dry. "It's a bill of sale for a human being," Ilara countered, not taking her eyes off the paper. Julian, who stood by the window, turned to face her. "It's a choice, Ilara, the one you're making right now." She looked at the pen, then at him. His face was an unreadable mask of corporate steel. She thought of another cold night on the streets, another day of hunger, another piece of her soul chipping away. With a deep breath that felt more like a surrender, She picked up the pen and signed her name. The moment the ink dried, she felt as if she had stepped out of her own life and into a role in a play she hadn't written. She hadn't written. The transformation was swift and disorienting. The dissolution, within hours, she was whisked away to a world of personal stylists and high-end boutiques. They didn't try to change her. They simply tried to dress her in the uniform of Julian's world. Her bone structure is exquisite, one stylist murmured, running a hand through Alara's tangled hair. With the right cut and color, she'll be a masterpiece. Masterpiece. Alara sat through it all like a stone, enduring the poking and prodding. When she finally saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair, now a rich chestnut, fell in soft waves around her face. A simple, elegant navy dress clung to her frame, and the subtle makeup highlighted the fierce intelligence in her blue eyes. She didn't look like a different person. She looked like the person she was always supposed to be, before life had worn her down. Julian was waiting for her. When she was done, he stopped mid-sentence when he saw her, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before his mask of indifference slipped back into place. "Acceptable," he said, his voice flat, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Surprise, admiration, he couldn't be sure. Admiration, sure. The first test is tonight. A family dinner. A family dinner. The Thorne family mansion was a monument to old money and rigid tradition. The air itself seemed heavy with expectation. As they walked in, Alara felt Julian's hand on the small of her back. So brow. A gesture that was meant to look possessive and loving but felt to her like the cold hand of a jailer. Arthur Thorne, the patriarch, sat at the head of a long, imposing dining table. He studied Alara with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Beside him sat Julian's sister, Cassandra, a woman who wore her condescension like expensive perfume. "So," Arthur began, his voice a low rumble, "Julian tells us you're an art history student. A fascinating field. Tell me, what is your particular area of interest?" This was the first test of the backstory Julian had concocted for her. Alara felt a surge of panic, but then fear. She looked at the smug expression on Cassandra's face, and her own innate defiance took over. Script. She wouldn't just recite a script. "I'm particularly drawn to the unsung artists of the post-war expressionist movement," Alara said. Her voice clear and steady. "I'll often focus on the big names, but there were artists like Eva Hesse, who were exploring concepts of fragility and chaos using industrial materials. Her work speaks to the idea that there is profound beauty in imperfection. That strength isn't about being unbreakable, but about how you hold yourself together after you've been shattered." The table went silent. Arthur Thorne leaned forward, a look of genuine interest on his face. Cassandra's smug smile faltered. Cassandra's smug smile. Julian stared at her, completely stunned. He had expected her to stumble, to need him to rescue her. He had not expected a dissertation on existential art theory. "So, a remarkable insight," Arthur said, nodding slowly. "Remarkable. Remarkable." For the rest of the dinner, Alara held her own. She was witty, intelligent, and articulate. She didn't try to fit in. She simply was herself, dressed in the costume of their world. When Cassandra tried to trip her up with a pointed question about her modest family, Elara smiled sweetly and said, "My family taught me that wealth is measured in character, not in assets. It's a lesson that has served me well." Wait, the jab was so subtle, so perfectly delivered, that Julian almost smiled. On the drive back to his penthouse, the silence was different. See, it wasn't empty, it was charged with a new, unspoken tension. "You performed better than I anticipated," Julian said finally, breaking the silence. "Wow." "I wasn't performing," Elara shot back, turning to look at him. "I was answering questions. Perhaps the person you invented for me isn't so different from who I actually am." He didn't respond. His eyes fixed on the road. He had brought her into his world to be a silent, beautiful accessory. Kwon, he had not expected her to have a voice. He had not expected her to have a mind that could disarm his entire family. He had thought this would be simple, another transaction to be managed, but as he glanced at her profile, illuminated by the passing city lights, he felt a deeply unsettling thought. For the first time in a very long time, he was not in complete control. PG. The next few days settled into a strange rhythm. Sutter 40 Elara explored the vast empty penthouse, feeling like a ghost in a museum. Julian was consumed by work, their paths crossing only in the evenings. Their interactions were brief, polite, and always guarded. He treated her with a detached courtesy, ensuring she had everything she needed, as one would a prized investment. Ever and the Maes. She in turn treated him with a cool distance, fulfilling her side of the bargain without offering an inch more of herself. The brickty, but the foundation of their arrangement was beginning to show cracks. One evening, Julian came home late, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. He loosened his tie and sank onto the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "Tough day at the office?" Elara asked from the armchair where she was reading. "The deal I've been working on for a year is falling apart," he said, his voice laced with a frustration he rarely showed. "A competitor is undercutting us, using tactics that are unethical." Ward heard, she said simply. "So fight back," she said simply. He looked at her. "It's not that simple. They have leverage." "Then find a different kind of leverage," she countered, closing her book. "You think in terms of money and power, that's your battlefield. But there are other weapons: loyalty, integrity, public perception. Your competitor is attacking your business. Attack his character." Julian stared at her, a strange expression on his face. The advice was sharp, strategic, and surprisingly insightful. It was the kind of thinking he respected. He hunt that, and where did an art history student learn so much about corporate warfare? He asked, a hint of suspicion in his tone. Elara met his gaze without flinching. "You learn a lot about survival when you have nothing." "What? The principles are the same, whether you're fighting for a market share or for a dry place to sleep. You find your opponent's weakness and you press on it until they break." He was silent for a long moment, studying her. The woman in front of him was a living contradiction. She was vulnerable and yet unbreakable. She had been on the streets, yet she possessed a mind as sharp as any CEO he had ever faced. The mystery of who she was, of how she came to be, began to consume him. The first major event they had to attend together was a charity gala. the pinnacle of the city's social scene. It was a performance, and Julian had orchestrated every detail. Ilara was dressed in a breathtaking emerald green gown that made her blue eyes sparkle like jewels. Diamonds, loaned for the evening, glittered at her throat and ears. Diamonds, as she descended the grand staircase of the penthouse. Julian felt an involuntary tightening in his chest. He told himself it was merely appreciation for a well-executed plan. His fiancée looked the part. Investment was paying off. "Remember the plan," he said, his voice a low murmur as they entered the glittering ballroom. "Smile, hold my arm, and let me do the talking." "You mean stand here and look pretty?" she whispered back, a sarcastic edge to her voice. "I believe I can handle that." The moment they entered, they were swarmed. Dreed Wondre reporters, business rivals, and society mavens all circled, hungry for a glimpse of Julian Thorne's mysterious new love. Julian handled them with his usual cool efficiency, introducing Ilara with a practiced ease. "Ilara, this is Marcus Vance, CEO of Vance Industries," he'd say. "A pleasure," Ilara would reply, her smile perfect, her handshake firm. But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. People weren't just looking at her, they were listening to her. Drawn in by the intelligence she'd shown at the family dinner, hate, which had quickly become the talk of the town, they began to engage her in real conversations. "Ilara, what are your thoughts on the new acquisition by Sterling Corp?" a powerful investor asked, clearly trying to test her. "Lee Gigist." Before Julian could intervene, Ilara answered. "From a purely financial standpoint, it's a sound move, but I think they've underestimated the cultural clash. Sterling Corp has a reputation for dismantling the very innovation that made their acquisition attractive. It's like buying a racehorse and then trying to teach it to pull a plow. The value isn't in the asset, it's in its spirit." The investor was taken aback, then impressed. He nodded thoughtfully. Julian watched, a complex mix of pride and annoyance swirling within him. She wasn't just his pawn anymore. Julian Watchett's. She was becoming a player in her own right. He found himself watching her not as his employee, but as Ilara. He watched the way her eyes lit up when she discussed a topic she was passionate about. He noticed the subtle way she would tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. Later in the evening, as they stood on a secluded balcony overlooking the city, Skop, the pied, the pretense between them momentarily fell away. "You're enjoying this," Julian stated. It wasn't an accusation, but an observation. "I'm enjoying surprising people who expect me to be nothing more than a decoration," she corrected him, her gaze fixed on the endless sea of lights below. "There's a difference." She turned to face him, the cool night breeze making the silk of her dress shimmer. "Is this what your life is like all the time? A stage? A performance where everyone is judging everyone else?" "It's the world I live in," he said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "It must be exhausting," she said softly, "and lonely." Her words hit him with an unexpected force because they were true. Hex, in that moment under the distant stars, she wasn't his fake fiancée. She was the only person in his entire world who saw the cracks in his perfectly constructed fortress. He felt an inexplicable urge to tell her something real, something not in the contract. But before he could speak, Cassandra appeared, a venomous smile on her face. "There you are, Julian. I was just telling everyone how you found your little diamond in the rough. It's such a Cinderella story." Her eyes raked over Ilara, filled with disdain. You clean up nicely, dear. It's amazing what a bit of money can do. For Mosser, the insult was designed to humiliate, to put Ilara back in her place. Julian tensed, ready to step in, but Ilara simply smiled, a calm, unshakable smile. "Thank you, Cassandra," she said, her voice like smooth steel. "And you're right, money is a powerful tool, but true elegance, like integrity, is something you're either born with or you're not. No amount of money can buy it." Cassandra's face went pale with fury. She was speechless. Ilara, without another word, turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Julian and his sister alone on the balcony. He watched her go, and for the first time he realized the contract he'd written had a fatal flaw. He had hired her to be his fiancée. He had not anticipated he would start to admire her. He had not anticipated that watching her defend herself with more grace and power than anyone he knew would feel like a victory of his own. And he certainly had not anticipated the fierce, protective surge he felt when his own sister tried to hurt her. The lines of their business transaction were beginning to blur, and the consequences, he suspected, would be anything but simple. The gala was a turning point. In the days that followed, the dynamic in the penthouse shifted from a cold, professional arrangement to a quiet, simmering battle of wills. Julian found himself inexplicably drawn to Ilara's presence. He'd come home from the office and find her in the library. Not reading art history books as her backstory dictated, but poring over financial journals and market analyses. She was studying him, his world, his language. He began to test her. He'd leave complex company reports on the coffee table, pretending they were misplaced. The next day, he'd find them back on his desk with a single, anonymous sticky note attached. Sticky? The QSAN projections for the Asian market are too optimistic. You're not accounting for the recent instability in their supply chain. Or your competitor's latest move isn't an attack, it's a distraction. Look at what they're acquiring while you're busy defending. Her insights were sharp, incisive, and infuriatingly accurate. He never acknowledged the notes, and she never admitted to writing them. It became their silent, secret conversation. A chess game played in the margins of his corporate empire. This growing intellectual respect only deepened the mystery of her past. He had hired the best private investigator money could buy, a man who could unearth secrets from a sealed tomb. But the report on Ilara Vance came back almost completely blank. "It's the strangest thing, Mr. Thorne," the investigator had said over a secure line. "It's as if she simply materialized 2 years ago." The Tremolth the buying piece. There are no school records before college, no birth certificate on file, no family history. She has a social security number, but it was issued recently. Her life, for all intents and purposes, began when she enrolled in City College under a hardship scholarship. Immigration. "That's impossible," Julian had snapped. "Everyone has a past." Not her. It's been wiped, scrubbed clean, a digital ghost. Whoever did this was a professional, maybe even government level. The information gnawed at Julian. Who was this woman living under his roof? Who had the power and skill to erase a life so completely? His initial theory, that she was just a clever girl who had fallen on hard times, was disintegrating. He had brought a stray into his home, only to discover she might be a wolf in disguise. The thought, instead of alarming him, intrigued him. He started observing her more closely. He noticed the small things. The way she'd flinch at loud, unexpected noises. The way she always positioned herself in a room with her back to a wall, her eyes subtly scanning the exits. These weren't the habits of an art student, they were the instincts of a survivor. One rainy afternoon, he found her staring out the window, her sketchbook open on her lap. But she wasn't drawing the city. She was sketching faces from memory, her charcoal moving with a feverish intensity. He walked closer and saw the faces were of children, gaunt, sad-eyed children, drawn with a heartbreaking tenderness. Who are they? He asked, his voice softer than he intended. She snapped the sketchbook shut, her body tensing. Just ghosts, she replied, her voice distant. The world left behind. You were one of them, weren't you? He pressed gently. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw a crack in her defiant armor. Her blue eyes were clouded with a pain so profound it stole his breath. The world is full of ghosts, Julian. You just don't see them from up here. Without another word, she left the room, leaving him with the haunting image of those children's faces. He was beginning to realize that the life she'd lived was not just one of poverty, but one of deep, unimaginable trauma. 1815's Siffersteing. He had offered her money to escape her circumstances. But he was starting to suspect that her demons couldn't be bought off. Whitley. The next obligatory performance on their schedule was a weekend trip. To his family's country estate for his grandfather's birthday. The prospect filled Julian with a sense of dread. Han Frestang Ming. The estate was Arthur Thorne's kingdom, a place where family politics were a blood sport. My grandfather will be watching your every move, Julian warned her as their car wound its way through the rolling hills. He's from a generation that believes a man's wife is a reflection of his judgment. Well, he will try to unnerve you. Rules? Unnerver spelled the spaceta. And you expect me to be a perfect, polished mirror? Ilara asked, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape. I expect you to hold your own. You seem to have a talent for it, he admitted, the words feeling strange on his tongue. She turned to him, a faint, unreadable smile on her lips. Don't worry, Julian. I won't embarrass you. I know how important appearances are in your world. The weekend was an orchestrated display of casual wealth and veiled hostilities. Hassian, Cassandra, was at her worst, making thinly veiled comments about Ilara's miraculous improvement in social standing. But Ilara navigated the treacherous waters with an effortless grace, disarming every passive-aggressive remark with sharp wit or serene indifference. 1. The true test came during a skeet shooting session on the second day. It was a Thorne family tradition, a display of skill and competitive spirit. Oh, I doubt Ilara has ever held a shotgun before, Cassandra said with a laugh, handing a beautifully engraved firearm to her. Be careful, dear, it kicks. Julian stepped forward, ready to make an excuse for her, to get her out of the situation. But Ilara took the shotgun, her movements surprisingly steady and confident. She brought it to her shoulder, sighted down the barrel, and with a calm focus, said, "Pull." A clay pigeon shot into the air. Ilara tracked it, her body perfectly still, and fired. The pigeon exploded into a cloud of orange dust. She lowered the gun, ejecting the spent shell with a practiced click. She then proceeded to hit the next 4 targets in perfect succession. The entire family stared, speechless. Arthur Thorne's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Cassandra's jaw was slack with disbelief. Julian felt a jolt of something that was undeniably pride. You pride. Where in God's name did you learn to shoot like that? I see, Arthur demanded, his voice a mixture of shock and approval. Returned her expression calm. My father believed every woman should know how to defend herself, she said simply, handing the shotgun back to a stunned Cassandra. He said the most dangerous predators are the ones who wear expensive suits and charming smiles. The double meaning was lost on no one. Arthur Thorne let out a short, booming laugh. We baith you mead sups to be sport. I like her, Julian. She has spirit. Later that evening, after the formal dinner, Julian found Elara on a stone terrace overlooking the estate's lake. The moon cast a silver path across the dark water. You continue to be a source of endless surprises, he said, standing beside her. But I'm full of them, she replied, not looking at him. Peeber sass stew and treen, you shouldn't have been so quick to judge the book by its tattered cover. That my investigator can't find a single record of your father or your mother. Who are you, Elara? He asked, the question that had been haunting him finally breaking free. She turned to him, her face shadowed by the moonlight. Does it matter? Matter? I am fulfilling the terms of our contract. Isn't that all you require? It mattered when you were just a means to an end, he confessed, taking a step closer. But now it's different. How is it different? She challenged, her voice a low whisper. Musta. Because I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, the words feeling both foreign and undeniably true. I find myself looking for you in a room. I find myself listening for your opinion. I find myself wanting to know the story behind the scars I can't see. The air between them crackled with an intensity that had nothing to do with their contract. It was raw, real, and dangerous. Beastat fat-free, he saw the walls in her eyes begin to crumble, the defiant blue softening into a sea of vulnerability. He lifted a hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Her skin was soft, and a jolt of electricity shot through him at the contact. Uliem. She didn't pull away. For a long, breathless moment, they just stood there, caught in the gravity of an unspoken truth. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. He was going to kiss her. He knew he shouldn't, that it would shatter the careful boundaries of their arrangement, but in that moment he didn't care. You hate. But just as his lips were about to meet hers, a voice sliced through the night. Julian? Is everything all right? It was his grandfather. They sprang apart, the spell broken. The walls in Elara's eyes instantly shot back up, her expression once again cool and distant. Everything is fine, grandfather, Julian said, his voice strained. Elara was just admiring the view. Arthur looked between them, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Indeed, he said slowly. A very compelling view. He turned to Elara. You've made quite an impression this weekend, young lady. Julian has finally shown some good judgment. Sir, independent. The compliment felt like an insult. Elara gave a tight, polite smile. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. I'm glad I meet with your approval. The moment was over. But the charge remained. As they returned to the city, the atmosphere in the car was thick with everything that had been left unsaid on that terrace. The lines had not just blurred, they had been erased. Psiquis, Julian Thorne, the man who controlled everything, was falling for the one person he was never supposed to feel anything for, and he had a terrifying suspicion that the real story of Elara Vance was about to be revealed, whether he was ready for it or not. Tumasact, the revelation came not with a bang, but with a whisper. It happened a week after the country estate visit, during a press conference for the Thorne Corporation's new philanthropic wing. A project Julian had launched to appease the board and polish his public image. The event was a media circus, held in the grand ballroom of one of his hotels. Elara was by his side, the picture of a supportive and elegant fiancée. She played her part to perfection, smiling for the cameras and murmuring words of encouragement to him. As Julian stood at the podium, delivering a speech about corporate responsibility, he felt a strange sense of detachment. The words felt hollow. His eyes kept drifting to Elara, who stood just off to the side. He was more interested in her reaction than in the reactions of the investors and journalists in the room. During the Q&A session, a reporter from a well-known financial paper stood up. "Mr. Thorne, a question for your fiancée, if I may." Julian tensed. This was not part of the plan. "Miss Vance is not taking questions at this time," he said firmly. "Tire book embrace, Herwan." But the reporter persisted. "It's a simple question. It's been noted that the Thorne Corporation recently settled a series of lawsuits related to the collapse of a smaller tech firm, Smalling, Corp. 5 years ago. Omnicorp about 5 years ago. Miss Vance, given your background in art, what are your thoughts on the ethics of a corporate giant absorbing a smaller competitor?" A murmur went through the room. It was a loaded question, designed to embarrass and trap. Julian felt a surge of anger, but as he turned to shield Elara, he saw that she didn't need his protection. Her face, which had been a mask of serene neutrality, had gone utterly pale. Her blue eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a look of profound, soul-shattering shock. It was as if the name Omnicorp had been a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the stage, her knuckles white. She seemed to be struggling for breath. "Elara," Julian whispered, moving to her side, his speech forgotten. "What is it?" She didn't seem to hear him. Her gaze was fixed on the reporter, but her eyes were seeing something far away, something in the past. Time seemed to slow down. The buzz of the room faded into a dull roar in Julian's ears. All he could see was her face, the blood draining from it, the sheer, unadulterated pain that had suddenly appeared there. And then she whispered a name so quiet only he could hear it. Daniel. The name meant nothing to him, but in that instant something clicked in his memory. Omnicorp, the hostile takeover, had been one of his first major victories as CEO. It had been brutal, efficient, and it had cemented his reputation as a ruthless corporate raider. He remembered the founder, a brilliant but naive innovator named Daniel. Daniel Vance? No, that wasn't his name. Elara stumbled slightly, and Julian's arm shot out to steady her. His touch seemed to break her trance. She looked up at him, and the look in her eyes was one of utter betrayal. It was a look that said Julian Thorne, was the source of her pain. "I need some air," she managed to say, her voice trembling. He immediately signaled to his security team. "The press conference is over," he announced, his voice sharp and commanding. He guided Elara off the stage, shielding her from the flashing cameras, and shouted questions. As they moved through the chaotic backstage area, he led her to a quiet service corridor. Creepy. "Ilara, what the hell was that?" he demanded, his mind reeling. "What is Omnicorp to you?" She leaned against the cold wall, her arms wrapped around herself. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a grief so immense it was like looking into an abyss. "Omnicorp," she said, her voice shaking with repressed emotion, "was my father's company." Julian felt the floor drop out from beneath him. "Your father?" he repeated, his own voice sounding distant and hollow. "But your name is Vance." The founder was Daniel Peterson. A single bitter tear traced a path down her cheek. "Vance is my mother's maiden name. I took it after everything happened, after you happened." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with a sickening finality. Her wiped past, her knowledge of corporate strategy, her ability to shoot a gun, her flinching at loud noises, the ghosts of the children in her sketchbook. It was all connected. "My father, Daniel Peterson, poured his life into that company," she continued, her voice gaining a cold, hard edge. "He believed technology could change the world for the better. He was a good man, an honest man, and you destroyed him. You didn't just absorb his company, Julian. You crushed his spirit. You launched a smear campaign, accused him of fraud, turned his partners against him. You bled him dry until he had nothing left." Barrister sings, "He wanted to deny it, to defend himself, but he couldn't." He remembered the strategy. It had been his, vicious but effective. "And being is, he lost everything," she said, her voice breaking. "Our home, his reputation, his will to live." 6 months after you finalized the takeover, my father walked into his garage and never walked out. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. The full weight of what she was saying crashed down on him. He hadn't just bankrupted a rival, he had destroyed a family. He had created the very circumstances that had put her on the street corner where he found her. "And my mother," Ilara's voice dropped to a whisper. "The stress, the grief, she fell ill. A cancer that the doctors said was exacerbated by extreme emotional distress. She was gone within a year." Far. He stared at her, horrified, speechless. He had been so proud of that victory. It had been a stepping stone to his empire. Ia's ring. Now he saw it for what it was. A tombstone for her family. "After she died, I was alone," she said, her gaze now empty. "I'd bifurus. I was Zhurchi. The state put me in the foster system. I ran away. I lived on the streets. I did what I had to do to survive. Subbrace. I erased myself, Julian, because I didn't want to be Daniel Peterson's forgotten daughter. I didn't want to be the legacy of your victory." Foils. He finally understood. Her entire life had been a reaction to his actions. She wasn't a wolf in disguise. She was a survivor of a war he had started. And then forgotten. He had hired the ghost of his own past to be his fake fiancée. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "Why would you agree to this? To be near me?" She let out a laugh, but it was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. "You think this was some grand plan for revenge? Do you see a mastermind in front of you?" She gestured to herself. "I agreed because I was cold and hungry. I agreed because you offered me a way out of a hell you created." I didn't even know who you were. To me, you were just another arrogant rich man. I had no idea you were the man who haunted my past." He reached out to her, an instinctive gesture of comfort, of apology, but she flinched away from his touch as if he were fire. "Don't," she whispered, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. "Don't you dare touch me." He was Julian Thorne. He had never apologized, never backed down, never lost. But standing there, in that cold service corridor, looking at the woman whose life he had unknowingly shattered, he felt something he had never felt before: the crushing, absolute weight of guilt. He had built his empire on the ruins of her world, and now the ghost he had hired was about to become his judge, jury, and executioner. The contract was meaningless. The game was over, and he had already lost. She was over. The silence that followed Ilara's revelation was a living entity, a suffocating presence in the cold, sterile corridor. For Julian, the world had tilted on its axis. Every victory he had ever celebrated, every milestone of his career, was now tainted by the devastating truth of its origin. Ewan's. He wasn't a self-made titan, he was a vulture who had built his nest with the bones of her family. He looked at Ilara, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a pawn or a mystery, but as the living embodiment of his greatest sin. The proud, defiant woman he had come to admire was a ghost of his own making. "The contract is void," he said, his voice raspy and unfamiliar to his own ears. "You're free to go. I'll have the full amount, double the amount, transferred to you immediately." Ilara stared at him, and then she laughed. It was not the cynical, street-smart laugh he'd heard before. It was a broken, hollow sound that echoed with years of pain. "Money?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You still think this is about money? You think you can put a price on my father's life, on my mother's grief, on the years I spent sleeping in doorways, terrified and alone?" She pushed herself off the wall, her strength seeming to return, fueled by a righteous fury. "You don't get to dismiss me with a bank transfer, Julian. You don't get to just pay your way out of this. You wanted a performance for 6 months? Well, you're going to get one. I will stay. I will fulfill every last clause of our agreement. I will smile at your parties, I will charm your grandfather, and I will stand by your side. And every single day, I want you to look at me and remember what you did. I want you to see my father's eyes staring back at you. That will be my payment. Your guilt is the only currency I'm interested in." Her words were sharper than any blade, and they cut him to the core. She was right. An easy escape was a coward's way out. And he had been a coward, hiding behind his wealth and power for too long. Perseus sighed. He had no right to her forgiveness. But he would not run from her judgment. "As you wish," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He had accepted the terms of his punishment. The days that followed were a form of exquisite torture. The penthouse, once a symbol of his power, became his prison. Ilara's presence was a constant, silent accusation. She was flawless in her role as his fiancée. She was gracious, intelligent, and poised. Fixatiful sausage. But to him, when they were alone, her eyes were filled with an icy disdain that chilled him to the bone. Every polite smile she gave him in public was a dagger in private. Every shared meal was consumed in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. He tried to talk to her, to explain, to apologize, but she shut him down with a cold finality. "There is nothing to say, Julian. The time for words is long past." "Skite. Bo," He was used to being the one in control, the one who dictated the terms. Now he was powerless. He was living in a world governed by her pain, and he could do nothing but endure it. He began to unravel. His focus at work shattered. He made mistakes, hesitated in negotiations. The ruthless certainty that had defined him was gone, replaced by a gnawing, relentless guilt. He started seeing her everywhere, in the faces of strangers, in the shadows of his office. He couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of her father, a man he couldn't even clearly remember, but whose ghost now owned his every waking thought. Fervials. His grandfather and sister noticed the change. "What's wrong with you, Julian?" Cassandra demanded one evening. "You look like you've seen a ghost." You have slishet, he thought. "Dat I'm engaged to one Smootert." He started digging into the Omnicorp files, forcing himself to read every detail of the hostile takeover. He saw the strategies he had employed, the lives he had upended, the smaller suppliers he had bankrupted in his quest to crush his rival. He saw the cold, calculated cruelty of his own actions, and he was disgusted. For the first time, he saw the human cost of his ambition. One night, unable to bear the silence of the penthouse any longer, he went to the library, where he knew Elara would be. She was sketching again those same haunted faces of children. He didn't speak. He just walked to a shelf, pulled down a heavy legal binder, and placed it on the table in front of her. It was the complete file on the Omnicorp takeover. "I want you to see it all," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I want you to know that I'm not hiding from it anymore. I'm looking at the monster I was." She looked from the binder to his face, her expression unreadable. She didn't open it. "Ooh. It's a little late for that, don't you think?" "I know," he said. "But it's a start." That small act didn't earn her forgiveness, but it was the first pebble in what would become an avalanche of change. Julian started using his resources not for acquisition, but for restitution. He discreetly tracked down the former employees of Omnicorp, the ones who had lost their pensions and their jobs. Through anonymous foundations, he set up funds to help them, paid off their medical debts, created scholarships for their children. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. He was trying to clean a stain from his soul, one impossible act of atonement at a time. Lara noticed. She saw the subtle changes in his schedule. The late-night calls that weren't about hostile takeovers, community outreach programs. She didn't acknowledge it, but the icy wall of her disdain began to thaw, just a little. The climax of his transformation came during the Thorn Corporation's annual shareholders' meeting. It was the biggest event of the year, a moment for Julian to project strength and confidence. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of powerful, wealthy faces. His grandfather sat in the front row, beaming with pride. 1062. Julian took a deep breath and set aside his prepared speech. "All 5 in wheat. Esteemed shareholders, members of the board," he began, his voice clear and strong. "Today, I am not here to talk about profit margins or market expansion. I am here to talk about a debt that this corporation and I personally have owed for 5 years. Thick-peaching, a confused murmur rippled through the audience. His grandfather frowned. 5 years ago, Julian continued, his eyes finding Elara, who stood at the back of the room. "Out and dar, we engaged in a hostile takeover of a company called Omnicorp. Guysop, we celebrated it as a victory. But it was not a victory, it was a destruction. We destroyed its founder, a good and honest man named Daniel Peterson. We destroyed his family. We destroyed lives. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Arthur Thorne was on his feet, his face a mask of thunderous fury. "Julian, what is the meaning of this? This is professional suicide." "No, grandfather," Julian said, his voice calm and resolute. "This is professional redemption." He turned back to the audience. "Effective today, I am establishing the Peterson Foundation, an initiative to support and fund tech startups founded on principles of ethical innovation. It will be endowed with a significant portion of my personal shares in this company. Furthermore, I am officially reopening the case of Omnicorp's collapse, and I will personally oversee a restitution program for every employee and family affected by our actions." He looked directly at Ilara, his heart in his eyes. "We built an empire on the ashes of good people. It's time we started building something better." He finished his speech and stepped away from the podium, leaving behind a room in absolute chaos. That year, he had detonated a bomb in the center of his own life. Sacrificing his reputation, his relationship with his family, and potentially his position as CEO, he walked through the pandemonium, his eyes only on Ilara. She stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, silent tears streaming down her face. But for the first time since the revelation, they were not tears of pain. They were tears of shock, of disbelief, of something that looked devastatingly like hope. He stopped in front of her, ignoring the cacophony around them. "I know it's not enough," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I know it doesn't bring them back, but it's the truth. It's what I can do." She looked at him, at the man who had just dismantled his own world in a public act of penance, the man who had faced the monster he was and had chosen to become someone else. The ice in her heart, the ice that had protected her for so many years, finally, completely shattered. "It's a start," she whispered, echoing his own words from the library. And then she did something he never thought possible. She reached out and took his hand. In the aftermath of the shareholders' meeting, Julian's world was irrevocably altered. His grandfather disowned him, Cassandra called him a fool, and the board of directors demanded his immediate resignation. He accepted it all without a fight. He had lost his empire, but for the first time in his life, he felt free. He and Ilara left the penthouse, that cold glass fortress, and moved into a small, unassuming brownstone in a quiet part of the city. Branging, the space was filled not with expensive art, but with her sketchbooks and the warm, messy reality of life. The contract that had brought them together was a distant memory. Now they were just two people, learning how to build something real from the ruins of their past. Their life was quiet. He spent his days working tirelessly to manage the Peterson Foundation, finding a purpose that felt more meaningful than any billion-dollar deal. Ilara enrolled in law school, driven by a fierce desire to fight for people like her father, the forgotten and the voiceless. They learned to talk, to truly listen. To talk, to truly listen. He learned about the nightmares that still haunted her, and she learned about the crushing loneliness of his gilded cage. He showed her his vulnerabilities, and she showed him her strength. The walls between them crumbled, replaced by a deep, profound intimacy built on a foundation of shared healing. One evening, about a year later, he came home to find her sitting on the floor of their living room, surrounded by her old sketchbooks. She was looking at the drawings of the gaunt, sad-eyed children. I was so angry for so long, she said softly, not looking up. I thought my story was only about loss. He knelt beside her, his hand gently covering hers. And now? She finally looked at him, her blue eyes clear and full of a love that was both fierce and gentle. Now, I think it's about what you build after the storm. It's a story of survival, of redemption. She gave a small, genuine smile. It's a love story. Bull. He felt a tightness in his chest, an overwhelming wave of emotion. He had never believed in love, had seen it as a weakness, but with her it was the greatest strength he had ever known. I love you, Elara Vance, he said. That, Cybis, the words feeling more real and significant than any contract he had ever signed. Or Peterson. Or Peterson, or whoever you want to be. I think I like being Elara Thorne, she whispered, leaning in to kiss him. Their wedding was nothing like the galas they had once attended. Fapuri A's. It was a small ceremony in the community garden she had helped create. She a base, surrounded by a small group of friends and the families they had helped through the foundation. Arthur and Cassandra were not there, but it didn't matter. They had built their own family, one forged in truth and forgiveness. As they stood under an archway of simple, beautiful flowers, exchanging vows they had written themselves, Julian looked at Elara. He saw the homeless artist, the brilliant strategist, the fierce survivor, and the woman who had taught him how to be human. He had hired her to be his fake fiancée, a temporary solution to a business problem. But in the end, in front of the world and in the quiet of his own broken heart, he had fallen in love with her. She hadn't just saved him from losing his company, she had saved him from himself. And that was a debt he knew he could joyfully spend the rest of his life repaying. What do you think of Julian and Elara's journey? On a scale of Yinto, what score would you give this story? We'd love to hear your opinion. For those who have come this far, comment redemption below.